today, but I did want to just greet everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Folks are all over the country. Welcome to our first webinar on SNAP employment and training for employment social enterprises. Want to really thank the employment social enterprises on the line, the government partners, the CBOs for taking the time today to learn. We are really excited about partnering with the Center for Employment Opportunities, Seattle Jobs Initiative, and the USDA to help all of you access SNAP E&T. And, we believe this is like an incredible opportunity to support the work of employment social enterprises. We've been really working hard to support all of you because we believe in this model so much, and to make it sustainable and scalable, we need resources just like this. These flexible resources really are critical, I think, to complement the business revenue that all of you are working so hard to generate. So, I just want to encourage you to take advantage of the webinars, the technical assistance, the resources that our team has pulled together. And we're very, very excited to, get started on this and look forward to a lot of success in pulling down these resources all over the country. So thank you so much. And thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Carla. Really appreciate you joining. So I wanted to, as Carla highlighted, I wanted to just take a moment to recognize our partners in this. So this is a collaborative team effort between Rediff, along with Seattle Jobs Initiative, and the Center for Employment Opportunity to really launch this program where we can couple SNAP E&T with employment social enterprises, because we think that's a great fit, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But just a little bit about each of our partners. So Seattle Jobs Initiative, SJI, in addition to being a SNAP E&T provider themselves, they are just an expert on this, and they have a great ability to kind of connect all the dots in this somewhat complex program in terms of helping to work with states and counties along with providers. So we're really thankful to have them as part of our team in this effort. And the Center for Employment Opportunities is a national employment social enterprise focusing on helping to serve individuals who were recently released from incarceration. So in addition to being an expert in SNAP E&T along with SJI, they're also a provider and a practitioner of SNAP E&T, and they bring a wealth of information from the perspective of employment social enterprises. So we really value their participation and their knowledge that they're going to be able to contribute to this program. And then we're Rediff. I think most of you who are employment social enterprises know us, but if you're not familiar with us, we're a venture philanthropy that's really focused on adding capacity to employment social enterprises. And specifically in this field, it's really about how do we help leverage capital and resources to help you do the good work that you're doing. And SNAP E&T is one of those vehicles that we think is really critical to doing that. So our program design is really based on a couple of things driven by training, technical assistance, peer learning, and mentoring. And so we have a webinar series, which you are a part of the kickoff right now. It's a 6-part webinar series where we're going to lay the foundation and the base about what is SNAP E&T. And each webinar is going to kind of look at an element or a component of SNAP E&T and how you administer it and what that entails. So as you signed up for this webinar, you are signed up for all 6 webinars. So participate as you can. All the webinars will be the materials, and the webinars will be recorded and posted to Rediff Workshop, which is our next point. We're, in addition to the webinar series, we're also going to be building out a resource platform for you all. And this is a free platform where all the best practices and resources will be available to you to help you become a third-party partner. And then last but not least, after the webinar series, we're going to be launching a SNAP E&T cohort, which is focused on specialized training and technical assistance. So our goal is that we're going to launch the application for this in May and then begin in the summer. And this is really to, again, this is a building process. So the webinar series are to lay the foundation, and then the cohort is really to jump in and do the deep dive on the technical assistance and the peer-to-peer learning, where we can then understand, like, how do we get to like the nuts and bolts of actually making this happen. So that's the next component of it. So stay tuned for more information on that. And again, thank you for joining the first of the webinar series. And like I said, it's something that I think we get asked about, and Carla alluded to this in her welcome, and you'll hear about this as, why SNAP E&T, and what's the value of third-party partnerships? And for us, the social enterprise, employment social enterprise model and SNAP E&T is like a perfect marriage of all the great things that you're doing align really perfectly with the mission and goals of SNAP E&T based on serving the clients, the use of funding that's available to you, the services that you're currently providing, and also your capacity. And we're gonna talk about each of these elements later on in the presentation. But if you're wondering if you're in the right place, I think you are if you're an employment social enterprise, and hopefully you feel like you are, and like this is a good fit after we go through the various webinars. So before I end my part, I want to introduce our two great people, Nick and Susan from Seattle Jobs Initiative. They're going to be leading the presentation today to really go through kind of the SNAP E&T 101 for you and laying the foundation for us. So I want to welcome Nick and Susan. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nick.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the great introductions. So today, as Greg said, we really want to start with the basics. And so what we want to do is give you a good overview of the SNAP E&T program today. SGI does we do a lot of technical assistance with states and counties and providers across the country. And like a lot of things in life, if you start with a good foundation, a good basic understanding, you can make good use of this program and really understand the opportunities and the benefits for your particular organization and your particular community. So this is the first of our webinar series. We're going to start with the basics. We'll add some more levels of detail as we go through, and then, as Greg said, in the cohorts, that will be a much more sort of individualized opportunity to really apply what we're talking about to your particular organization. So we think between all of that, it's a really strong and full package. So today, as you can see from our agenda, we're going to do this overview. We'll talk about eligibility and funding. We'll talk a lot about third-party partner, what a third-party partner is, and introduce you to some of the SNAP E&T terms that you'll get used to if you're not used to it already. So we'll talk about what a third-party partner is. We'll talk about reimbursement, the reimbursement model. We'll talk about how referrals are made. And then we'll take you in a closer look at the third-party partner approach or model from the perspective of the funding you might need, the capacity you need, the services, the participants, like who you're serving, some tips for success. And then at the end of our presentation, CEO is going to talk a little bit about their experience as an actual provider to kind of bring some of this to life for you, to apply it in that way. So that's what we have planned for you today. And as Greg said, we're looking at maybe an hour or so. And do feel free to submit questions or even just clarifying points if you like. If I say something that's confusing, happy to clear that up halfway through and then again at the end. So go ahead to the next slide, Greg. So let's start with kind of the basics. So first of all, SNAP Employment and Training is a program. It's an employment and training program overseen by the Department of Agriculture and Food Nutrition Services, which is unique because you would expect this type of program to be overseen by Department of Labor or something, an organization like, or an entity like that. But it is part of USDA. And the way I sort of think about that, which to me sort of helps to make sense of this, is that if you think of SNAP, which we've traditionally thought of as food stamps, SNAP is there to address food insecurity for millions and millions of Americans across the country. The companion program to the SNAP program is SNAP Employment and Training. It's much less known. It's not as prevalent, but SNAP Employment and Training is really there to address, in my mind at least, some of the underlying causes and conditions that put people in a situation where they feel insecure about how they're going to pay for food and how they're going to cover a lot of other costs. So the program's really sort of fit well together, addressing food insecurity and then addressing at least some of the conditions that contribute to food insecurity. So, so that's some just, kind of basic perspective and understanding of how this all starts to fit together. So all states in the country, every state and territory in the country is responsible for operating a SNAP employment and training program. And each state and territory has to submit an annual plan laying out their program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how that's relevant. The USDA has put a lot of time and effort and resources into expanding the E&T program over the last 5 or 6 years. SGI has been involved in a project called SNAP to Skills. I would encourage everybody to check out the SNAP to Skills website. We've been working with states in conjunction with FNS to help them understand the model and build the model out from a state perspective, which is very important. The USDA spends about $350 million a year annually on this program, and there's opportunity to grow that. It's an uncapped, it is actually an uncapped program. And in federal fiscal year 2018, the E&T program served just under 458,000 people across the country. And my guess, we don't have these numbers, but my guess is 2019 was probably better than that. 2020, of course, because of the pandemic, probably wasn't. But it is a big and significant program. And again, there's a lot of opportunity to grow and expand. And my guess is that many of you that are on the webinar today, your organizations are serving people that either are on SNAP or likely eligible for SNAP and could be added to that number of 458,000. So states have a lot of flexibility in how they design their employment and training programs, which is really good. As I think you're going to see, the E&T model, I think, is very flexible. It matches a lot of different program models and approaches, which is great. That flexibility is interesting in how it sort of gets operationalized and played out across the country. So some states have very robust SNAP employment training programs with lots of third-party partners. Susan and I, work in the state of Washington. Washington has all 34 of its community and technical colleges on as providers. I think about 60 or 70 different community-based organizations are third-party partners. So it's a huge program in the state of Washington. Other states are not there. They have fewer partnerships, a less robust program. And a lot of states are actually really in the process of just sort of figuring this out and bringing partners on in sort of the first waves or second waves. So there's a lot of flexibility. One of the things that we'll talk about, not so much today, but as we move forward is, and what's important to all of you that are listening, I think today is to understand what your state or your county's E&T program looks like and how it works and how you become a partner, because there is this variation across the state. And the other thing I'll say about that is that it's an employment and training program, but to learn about it and to become a partner, you talk to your SNAP agency, not your Department of Labor initially. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide, Greg. So, so this model is it's a partnership, it's a collaboration between USDA and FNS at the federal level, the state level, and third-party partners. But as I've sort of just said, ultimately, a lot of the responsibility comes down to the state SNAP agency. And so if you're going to, become a partner, if you're already a partner, you'll know this, they're going to become your new best friend because that's who you're going to want to work with and coordinate with as an E&T partner or provider. So next slide. So the state plan, as I said, each state is responsible for operating an E&T program, and each state submits a plan annually, kind of laying out their program. And so it's, the vision, you plan growth, a list of their third-party partners that they have, in some cases that they might be adding, the types of services they're offering. We're going to talk about components. That's the SNAP E&T term for employment and training services. A unique thing about the state plan to keep in mind is that it's based on the federal fiscal year, so it goes October to September. And states have to submit their plans to FNS by the 15th of August every year. Now that's important because the plan, this state plan, is often the main vehicle that states use to bring on new partners. So oftentimes they will do their planning and their bringing on new partners tied to when that plan is due. So, it could work out that a state's going to bring on 5 new partners. That is included in this plan that's submitted in August, and those partners might come on board the 1st of October. It doesn't always happen like that, but this is sort of something that you could expect. That also means that the state would maybe start doing its planning and its outreach to new providers, well before August. Could be in June, could be in springtime sometime. But these are sort of some important dates to remember. The one thing also I will add to that is that states can amend their plans. They don't want to do that overly frequently, not too frequently, because it's a certain amount of work, but they can amend plans. And so there might be other opportunities over the course of a year to be added on as a third-party partner, based on what your state is doing and kind of how they want to operate and do that. But so August 15th, an important date. Plan amendments still an option. Good things to sort of start to think about and track. And the other thing is that that the state can't commit their E&T funds until the plan is approved by FNS, and so that also takes a little bit of time. So there are some lags and things like that. But again, this is all stuff that's part of the program. And I can tell you, as we've worked across the country, people understand this like any other system. They adapt and they make it all work. Next slide, Greg. Okay, so there's a Venn diagram that was part of the introduction. I didn't really go over too closely, but you're going to see that quite a bit. And that Venn diagram, I think, is going to be an important framework for us to look at throughout this entire project. But on that Venn diagram, one of the circles, one of the parts are your clients, your SNAP recipients. So we're sticking with kind of the basics, the foundations. Who is actually eligible for SNAP E&T? And the answer to that is somebody that's on SNAP, and they have to actually be on SNAP, receiving SNAP in a particular month, signed up with an E&T provider to be eligible. So you're on SNAP, but not on TANF. So a lot of people on TANF are also on SNAP, but what we know is that the TANF program has its own employment and training services for TANF recipients and some different sort of rules and regulations. So if somebody's on TANF, they're not going to be part of SNAP E&T. If somebody transitions off of TANF, they can be part of SNAP E&T, but while you're on TANF, you're not going to be on SNAP E&T. But again, if you have people on SNAP, or if you have people that are highly eligible, you think that you can move on to SNAP, that's who's going to be eligible for SNAP E&T. And then another thing that FNS includes in their eligibility is people that are able to work upon program completion. And I just want to say, don't overinterpret what this means. This doesn't mean you have to diligently assess and pick the people who are going to be successful in your program. This is really an indication that this program is about work. And so if somebody's on SNAP and they want to work, if they need to work and they want to participate in E&T, then that's probably who should be involved in SNAP E&T. And so it's really just kind of understanding that this program really is about moving people to work and employment and a greater level of self-sufficiency. And actually a lot of people that participate in SNAP E&T are working when they start that. I mean, you can be working and participate in SNAP E&T, although that's not always the case. So another couple of things that are important to remember is that SNAP employment and training does not have participation time limits. So TANF, for example, does. SNAP and SNAP employment don't. So as long as somebody qualifies, which is typically based on income and maybe a few other factors, they can participate in SNAP E&T. And then different states states have a choice between either a mandatory or voluntary program. We'll get into what that actually means right now. Most states are going in the direction of voluntary program, which at least from SJI's perspective is kind of the better way to go. It's less, it requires less documentation, more flexible, and the whole idea of it being voluntary, I think, is a better message. Next slide, Greg. Okay, so let's talk about the funding. So we talked about, who is the SNAP E&T client, and now let's talk about the funding, which is always a big of much importance. So FNS provides really two opportunities for funding, or two funding tracks. We're not going to talk too much about the ABOD funds because they don't really apply here. But FNS offers what are called 100% funds. And these are formula funds that go to each state, and they're based on formulas, so like the number of work registrants, number of ABODs, things like that. Every state in the country gets at least $100,000 a year. Many states get several $1 million. It's all based on some numbers and population. These 100% funds are really designed to fund sort of the administration and the basic infrastructure of SNAP E&T. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but there are opportunities to use this to fund actual services, but that doesn't happen a whole lot. And really, I think in practice, it's probably in for everybody's best interest if these 100% funds support E&T, administrative capacity, because that's what's going to allow a more robust E&T program. The other option are these 50-50 funds, which I think many of you may have heard about. And again, this is really where the opportunity lies. So 50-50 funds will cover things like administrative reimbursements. So that's all of your staffing, your employment specialists, your job developers, your coaches, all of that type of work that happens, as well as participant reimbursements. So things like work clothes, transportation, the types of things that people need to actually be successful getting through an employment and training program, getting a job and staying employed. So, and we'll talk a whole lot more about this, but the 50-50, what this is really based on is that these funds need to be non-federal funds that an organization, a third-party partner, has and is utilizing to serve SNAP employment and training participants. And they're using these funds to support the employment and training services that are part of their SNAP E&T program. We'll go into what all this means in just a second. But just to sort of try and explain a little bit of how this works in a very sort of overly simple way, is that if an organization is spending $10,000 in a month in non-federal funds that aren't matched with another federal source, and they're using those funds for employment and training services for SNAP E&T participants, once they spent those $10,000, once those services are delivered, they can submit an invoice to the state, assuming they're a contracted partner, and they'd be reimbursed up to $5,000 or 50 cents on the dollar. So it's a true reimbursement model. You spend your money for once those funds come back to your organization, they lose their federal status. So they become non-federal funds that can be reinvested in the program. So we'll talk a bit more about all of that in a second. Next slide, Greg. Okay, so the 100% funds, as I said, these really cover administrative expenses. The staffing at your SNAP agency, whether it's a state level or county, in some cases it can be used for direct services like tuition and fees, case management, these types of things. Again, I wouldn't expect a whole lot of that in your state. It does happen. And some states will use these 100% funds to kind of seed or get people started. But it's not something I would expect as a third-party partner to be able to apply for and receive. But again, these are really important, and without them, the program would have a hard time operating. So next slide. So the 50-50 funds, which I talked about it just a second ago, again, they cover administrative costs, participant reimbursements. So for example, if you're spending non-federal funds to buy supplies, work supplies, pay for people's transportation, if you're using non-federal funds, you can get reimbursed for those types of things. In the SNAP E&T world, those funds, you have to sort of be careful on how you do some of that stuff. But again, it's a great opportunity to take money that you're already spending and draw down and leverage it for this reimbursement. It is flexible funding. I mean, there are definitely rules and parameters around it, but the model can, as I said before, can really cover a lot of different types of models and approaches, you know, supported employment programs, transitional employment, all kinds of different program designs. So that's a really nice feature to SNAP E&T. And it can be used in a way to kind of fill in the gaps. So in practice, somebody can be funded with SNAP E&T and WIOA funds all at the same time. Not for the same services, obviously, but you could be co-enrolled in both of those programs. And that's just one example of sort of a co-enrollment or braided funding approach. Next slide, Greg. So what is a third-party partner? And again, we use this term a lot. So it's an organization, so it could be a social enterprise that's contracted with the SNAP agency. As I talked before, they're in the state plan, they've submitted some type of proposal, they've been accepted, they're a contracted provider, and they're operating and taking referrals, making referrals, and serving people on SNAP. And typically, you know, what a third-party partner, a real foundational part of that is that they are funded through this reimbursement program. So what's unique about the third-party partner model is that when you apply with your state or county, for example, the state or the county isn't going to say, hey, we have a pot of money we're gonna grant out to you to be an E&T partner. They're going to say, what non-federal funds do you have that you can bring to this partnership to use to deliver services for SNAP E&T participants and then be reimbursed on. So that's sort of a different approach, but that's, again, really fundamental to the third-party partner role. And as I said before, you know, you can be reimbursed on 50 cents on the dollar. It's a federal funding stream, and again, once it comes back to you, it loses that federal designation and is eligible as a non-federal resource for the future. Next slide, Greg. So a little bit more about how the money flows, just so you have an understanding of this. So as I said, the state puts together this E&T plan that's submitted and approved. Federal funds are authorized. The state can then draw down those funds, and they do that when they're billed by a third-party partner, for example. And then the state will issue a payment to the third-party partner, you know, based on this reimbursement. Or another way to look at it is a third-party partner delivers a service, they submit an invoice to the state reviews the invoice, okays it, then asks F&S for reimbursement. F&S gives them the money, and then it comes back down to the provider. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, as you can imagine, that process doesn't happen quickly with these different layers. So in many states and counties, the SNAP agency is able to reimburse providers before being fully reimbursed, before actually receiving the reimbursement from the feds, from F&S. They're able to do that, which is nice, because an organization submits an invoice, they get reimbursed in a timely fashion. I know the state of Washington is able to do that, and many other places are as well. So again, that's one of the types of questions you would want to maybe consider checking with your state or your county, if you're in a county administered state, just to see what that timeline looks like. But you know, regardless of the timeline, that's kind of how the money flows and how it all works. So with that, we're going to take just a second to pause and do kind of a check-in and see if there are, you know, questions or comments, or if I've confused anybody yet.
So sometimes it's clear as mud if this is the first time you're hearing it, hopefully you're seeing kind of the flow and the process that Nick's laying out. So feel free to type in any chat questions in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and ask a question, I'll pause for a minute and field any of those. Are participant wages an eligible expense? That's a great question.
It's a good question, yeah. So we are going to talk about that in just a minute. I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder on that. But I will tell you, just as a hint, that there's good news on that one, and you'll hear more from Susan on that in just a second.
How can community colleges participate as third-party vendors?
Community colleges. So really in practice, there's no difference between a community college and a community-based organization. Again, it really goes back to your state SNAP agency, or your county if you're in a state like California, for example. And it really depends on what your SNAP agency is doing as far as third-party partnerships go. Are they actually recruiting for colleges? Are they recruiting just for community-based organizations, or both? What we've seen in some places is states will start with community-based organizations, kind of get their feet wet, and then move to community colleges, or sometimes it'll go in reverse, or sometimes it'll just be everybody. But a lot of what's been said so far is equally applied to community colleges.
Thanks, Nick. How about for-profit entities that are employment social enterprises?
I don't think there's reasons to rule out a for-profit. I think that's, as far as I know, sometimes, we need to be careful. Some of these become sort of F&S policy questions. But I do think that is an option. I think, for a for-profit, they have to kind of look at, like anything else, does this align with their model? Does it align with kind of how they operate?
There are actually a couple for-profit workforce organizations in the state of Washington who are SNAP E&T providers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not common, but it is an option.
So more questions rolling in. We'll take about maybe like 5 more minutes, and we have about 20 minutes carved out at the end as well. So if we don't get to it in this part, we'll bring those up. Right. Hey, Joe from Downtown Women's Center is an LA Rise partner. And they receive funding from city and county sources. So is that an allowable cost to leverage those dollars as part of SNAP E&T reimbursement?
Certainly, yeah. And Susan will talk more about this, but yeah, that's a very common, city, county, levy funds, those local dollars, they're going to be all eligible. The only thing you need to be sure on is that those dollars are not being used to match some other federal program. And sometimes it takes a little bit of, investigation to make sure that whoever's giving you those dollars isn't matching it with another federal program for some reason.
Great, thanks. So Jonathan is asking about something you brought up around time limits, to kind of clarify what that means. Do you mean that a SNAP E&T participant can continue to receive services if their income is under a certain level? When can they no longer receive services?
Right. So one way to think about this is, TANF has a time limit. I think it's usually 60 months. Some states are shorter than that. With SNAP, there aren't those types of time limits. You can receive SNAP, on an ongoing basis as long as you qualify financially. So for somebody on SNAP that's participating in SNAP E&T, they can participate in SNAP E&T as long as they're on SNAP, which doesn't have a time limit. Now, once somebody goes off of SNAP, they're not going to qualify for SNAP employment and training, and they may go off for a variety of reasons. One may be that they earn too much money. They've gotten a job and they don't qualify financially any longer. And Susan will talk about this a little bit, but I will tell you that there is an opportunity to be eligible for SNAP employment and training when you're no longer eligible for SNAP, and it's really through a job retention mechanism. So somebody's been participating in SNAP E&T, gets a job, and then they go into what we call job retention, and they're still eligible for SNAP employment and training services like participant reimbursements. That's typically for a 90-day period.
Let's take two more, and then we'll go on. So is WIOA funding federal funding, and can 50% reimbursement apply here?
Right, WIOA is a federal funding source, so it's not going to be eligible. You find a lot of good federal programs that are funded with federal dollars. They're great, but yeah, they aren't going to be eligible for reimbursement. So I think that's where you have to kind of look at how you could sort of partner with a WIOA program or funding, how you can sort of braid those funding streams together and make it work. which takes, a fair amount of, collaboration, cooperation, and sort of close look.
So let's take this last question from Lydia, and then Phyllis and Naomi, we'll get to your questions soon. So a little bit about how you become a third-party partner. The question is, like, do you have to follow up with your state SNAP agency to see if they have openings for vendors, participants? I don't know if we're going to speak to that a little later, but just maybe a brief kind of how the process works.
Yeah. So, you do need to talk to your SNAP agency, again, at the state or county level, and you find out how and when and if they're bringing on third-party partners. So in a lot of states, they'll do maybe like an RFP or an RFI type of process. Other states, like state of Washington, it's more of a sort of an application. It's not so rigorous, but that's where you start. You find out, if they're taking applications for third-party partners, when they're going to do it and how, and that's kind of where you start. And so again, I mean, these are the type of questions that that we want to be able to get to on a more specific basis in this project, in particular in the cohorts, like how it works in a particular state.
Yeah, great plug. I was going to mention that as well, Nick. I think, like again, the intention of the webinars is to kind of just get your knowledge base up and set the kind of the foundation for that. But the cohort this is where we can kind of help you navigate some of this of, who is your local SNAP agency, county or state? How do we help connect you? How do we help kind of bridge some of those gaps where we can? So that's really the benefit of the cohort, is that deeper dive kind of assessment and technical assistance that I think will be very valuable for all of you. So let me stop the questions there. And don't worry, like I said, we have at least, I think, 15 or 20 minutes at the end for more questions. So with that, Susan, I think you're up.
Yep.
Okay. I had to unmute myself. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Nick. So now that we've been given a high level introduction to what SNAP E&T is, I'm going to spend the next several slides talking more about how your programs can fit into SNAP E&T. And I'm going to start with how participants actually enroll in SNAP E&T. As you dive deeper into SNAP E&T, you're going to hear the term referral a lot. And there's kind of two types of referral. An important thing to note up front is that enrollment into SNAP E&T is always done by the SNAP agency. And the process by which someone is enrolled into SNAP E&T is actually called referral. So here we can see two processes by which participants can be referred into SNAP E&T. And the top is called direct referral. And what that means is an individual, likely they're enrolling into SNAP and they're working with someone from the SNAP agency to get onto SNAP. And at that point, that person also screens them for eligibility and into SNAP E&T. And then they get referred into SNAP E&T. And that could be that they're given a referral to go meet with a third-party partner, or they're referred into maybe a program that's run by the state agency. So that's called a direct referral. This bottom process is called reverse referral, and this is probably going to be the more likely process for an employment social enterprise who is a SNAP E&T provider. And what reverse referral means is that a person's going to come into your organization, into your program, and you're going to assess them not only for fit for your program, but you might also assess them for SNAP E&T eligibility. And if they get into your program, they meet all the sort of the criteria that you have for your training program, then you would then communicate with the SNAP agency to determine their SNAP E&T eligibility. So that could be that they have to verify that they're actually on SNAP or eligible for SNAP. So if the individual was on SNAP already, then the SNAP agency could then do that referral and enroll them into SNAP E&T, and that information gets communicated back to you, the SNAP E&T partner. And just something to note, that's also a point where if they're not on SNAP, that can be kind of caught, and your agency could kind of communicate that back to the participant and possibly recommend them to go apply for SNAP. So that's sort of that describes kind of the two ways that people get into SNAP E&T. And again, just remember that we'll use that term referral a lot, and that's what that means in the SNAP E&T world, is that they actually enroll into SNAP E&T, and that's always done via the SNAP agency, whether it's direct or reverse. Next slide, please. So this slide, this kind of zooms in on part of that process, and it really describes how an individual is verified for eligibility from the provider perspective or the partner perspective. So again, you as a program have the ability to kind of structure your program and include whoever is fit based on your mission. And so some programs, when they become SNAP E&T partners, they opt to solely include only SNAP eligible or SNAP E&T eligible participants. But often what's going to happen is you're going to have a mix. And so when they come into your program, you're assessing them for eligibility for your program, but this is also a good point where you assess them for their SNAP eligibility as well. So determine where they're at in that process. And then if they're moving forward to become a part of your program, then you're verifying their SNAP E&T eligibility through some means of communication. It varies state by state. Each state SNAP agency kind of has a process defined for how partners communicate and to verify eligibility. And at that point, they're referred into SNAP E&T if they're eligible. Or again, if they're not, then that's an opportunity for that individual to apply for SNAP, and then you verify their eligibility again. And this kind of cycle of verifying the eligibility is ongoing, and it's often tied to your schedule for billing for services. So remember, this is a reimbursement program. So you're providing the services up front using your non-federal funds, and then you're invoicing the SNAP agency for those allowable services to draw down the reimbursement. So you have to ensure that the services offered to participants are being offered to a participant who is actually eligible to receive SNAP E&T services at the time. We'll get more into the details of that. There are a lot of questions I would imagine might pop up regarding that process. But this is kind of just a high level snapshot of what that looks like, and something for your program to consider as you move forward about either whether you're going to have a mix and be separating out who's SNAP E&T, or if you're going to focus solely on SNAP E&T. And even then there's some complexity with that we'll talk about more later. Next slide, please. So we're introducing this Venn diagram. Once again, this is really kind of the framework for how we talk about who's going to be an ideal third-party partner, and it's really where these different elements converge in the middle. So a third-party partner is going to have what we consider the right funds, which those will be non-federal, not federally matched funds to spend on services, the right capacity. So that often involves your administrative capacity to operate this program. It does come with administrative effort. So, and then the right participants. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the right services. So it's really in that center where you want to sort of find yourself to be a SNAP E&T third-party partner. Next slide, please. So we're going to go circle by circle, and we'll start with funds. So The funds that are eligible to draw down reimbursement are some good examples, and Nick mentioned these a little bit earlier. Any funds that are state, county, and city that come to you kind of free and clear, that aren't being used as match for any other federal grant. Also, donations that you're receiving from the private sector, foundation grants are a great source of non-federal funds for social enterprises, but also your business revenue that you draw in as a social enterprise. And I think that's the key thing to note for you all who are operating social enterprises. This is a unique source of non-federal funding that you can use, and one of the reasons why SNAP E&T is kind of a unique fit for your organization. The one major exception to this non-federal theme is organizations who receive community development block grants, which are federal in origin. They lose their federal status when they come down to the organization, and they are allowed to be used as a non-federal funding source to draw down reimbursement. They're common with community action agencies are largely the organizations that are receiving community development block grants. But if it is a source of funding for you, you can consider that an opportunity to draw down reimbursement. Next slide, please. So participants, again, this is kind of a review of what Nick talked about when we're talking about the right participants. We're talking about people who are low income and therefore SNAP eligible, who are not receiving TAN of cash, and again, this able to work. So, I think this is something that's probably really just consistent with how you're looking at who you're serving. Is if your goal is to get people into employment, you're working with folks who share that goal and have that ability to do that as well. So I think again, it's very much in line with, I think, how employment organizations operate too, that you're serving people that have the likelihood that they're going to achieve employment as an outcome of the services they're receiving. Next slide. So here we get into the services circle, and this is where we'll talk about E&T components. And again, components is the language used to describe the different services allowed within SNAP E&T. So there's this whole stack of different services operated or offered through SNAP E&T. Supervised Job Search, so that entails helping somebody in their job search activities looking for work. This can happen either kind of, that could be sort of the primary service you're offering, or it's often accompanied with or following, participating in a training component. Job search training. And then again, work experience. And somebody asked a question about subsidized employment. I'll have to excuse my cat is trying to chime in as I present here. So please ignore that. Subsidized employment. So this is new to SNAP E&T with the 2018 Farm Bill, and they just released the final rule that subsidized wages are included within the work experience component. I will say there's a lot to be learned, and I would imagine states are likely waiting for further guidance before they're going to add this to their state plans. So something to note, the services that are available through SNAP E&T, this is the broad list, but then states have sort of the discretion to offer what they think are kind of the priority services within their state plans. That can change over time. If they see that there's an opportunity, it's often the case that they'll broaden that as much as possible. But other services or components, job training, education, so anything that's offered to support that process to becoming employed or getting a better job. Self-employment, so That's another component that's offered. And then as Nick mentioned, job retention, that's the component where if you're no longer SNAP eligible because you participated in components earlier through SNAP E&T, and that resulted in employment that put you over the income threshold to receive SNAP, there's a 90-day period where you can still be eligible to receive SNAP E&T services, and the provider can draw down reimbursement for those services to provide support to help that person keep the job. So that's the one exception. And then case management is another component. However, it must be integrated into all of these different components. And I think that the spirit of that is really, these are all meant to be services that are offered with kind of the added support of the provider, making sure and helping that individual move along in their activities and move into employment. Next slide, please. So another aspect of the right services is offering the right types of wraparound support to help individuals persist through their training. And these are really key often to helping individuals succeed. And this is one of the kind of I think the really strong appealing aspects of this of SNAP E&T is that the wide array of wraparound support services that are eligible for reimbursement. A big one being transportation. I think that's utilized quite often, and that can look like a bus fare or community, public transit for people to get to and from their training location, but it could also come in the form of fuel to drive their own vehicle to and from training. It just has to be, all of these support services have to be connected to a SNAP E&T activity or a component as well. Another big one is childcare. I think that can often be a barrier for individuals to participate in E&T activities, and it's expensive. And so that's another service that's really valuable, and providers are able to support that need and also get reimbursed for it. And then housing is, when we talk about emergency housing, it's important to remember that the intent is that it's a temporary support to stabilize somebody's housing. It's not that you're going to pay their rent for the duration of their participation. So it's really an emergency support to keep somebody from losing their housing while they're participating in SNAP E&T. Next slide, please. So the next circle we're going to talk about is capacity. And within that, it's important to think about your capacity to collect data and to report. And some of those activities are probably part of what you're doing for serving your clients anyway, but might need some just more effort or thought around how what you need to do in order to fit in with SNAP E&T. But assessing and developing employment plans for participants and tracking that, noting case noting and tracking their progress through the program is an important activity that needs to be documented, and you need to have the capacity to do that. Tracking the component activity for each of your participants. SNAP agencies are required to report on that and to understand the level of the component activities. So that's information that they have to get from their third-party partners. And then outcomes, of course. We all want to tell the story of how our participants are succeeding based on due to these activities. Next slide, please. And then additional capacity, administrative and fiscal. So this is a federal funds program. So costs that are expended need to be documented according to all of the regulations that come with a federal funding stream. And then having the ability to manage federal funds, participate in audits, participate in monitoring from your SNAP agency. You know, if you think about just other federal programs, there's just a chain of oversight that goes all the way down to the provider, and it is on the provider to really assume kind of that responsibility of making sure they're managing federal funds appropriately and to be prepared to be reviewed in those processes. And then the other piece of that of capacity is being able to budget for your program largely, and then also being able to carve out your SNAP E&T budget, and then having the mechanism to invoice for the SNAP E&T services that you're providing. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of information, and each you know, element there that I've just touched on are you know, things that as we go through this webinar series, we'll dive deeper into. And if you have questions, I think that's good. We're doing our job. If you want to know more, that's kind of right where we want you to be. But some tips for success as a SNAP E&T third-party partner. Embrace collaboration with your SNAP agencies. So again, you know, they are the oversight of this program within your state. And so your contract will be with your SNAP agency, whether that's the state or the county SNAP agency. So having good collaboration, good lines of communication are really important in order to be successful. Hear what their guidance is. Look to see what their handbooks include. Most states who have a robust third-party SNAP E&T program have a good handbook that lays out all the guidelines and policies that are required for this program. Another really big one, I think, is, you know, when we talk about SNAP E&T and we talk about this great opportunity, it can sort of spark the creative juices. Like, what could I do? What could we do to really, you know, take advantage of this opportunity? And that's great. But I think something to remind yourself is that you really want to start with what you do and what you do well. This isn't necessarily the time to plan a brand new program. Integrate SNAP E&T into what you're already doing and what you already do well. This is sort of the beauty of this program and why it's such a great opportunity. You know, Nick mentioned earlier, SNAP E&T is run by SNAP, and they aren't workforce, and they're looking to, in the third-party model, they're really looking to their workforce community to offer the services that are going to serve their SNAP population well. So think about what you do now and what you do well, and that's really, and how that fits into SNAP E&T. That doesn't mean there's a room to grow in your capacity as you kind of get your feet on the ground. But right now, I don't think this is the time to try to reinvent your program to fit into SNAP E&T. And then these last two bullets, I think it's just important to highlight and call out the importance of establishing and documenting your internal processes for these two pieces of eligibility verification and then the management of your federal funds. So establish and document your processes and train your staff so they can do this confidently and effectively. I think those are just some really good pieces of advice, and a lot of the next webinars that we'll be offering in this series will dig more into those processes. And with that, I want to turn it over to Casey, who is going to give you an example from her organization.
Greg, do you want to hit the next slide? Hi, everyone. I'm Casey. I'm from CEO. As Susan said, you'll hear a lot more from us in the following webinar series. But at this point, I just wanted to be the hype woman a little bit for this program and just let you know that CEO has really leveraged E&T across our offices. Just to kind of go through the 4 buckets quickly. To provide an example, with our Colorado offices, we have non-federal funds that we leverage there. Our primary funds for our social enterprise is our state transportation department. About 60% of our participants are SNAP enrolled. So someone asked a question about, can individuals with a criminal record access SNAP E&T? And all of our participants are returning home from incarceration and need SNAP and need food security as part of their transition. So we would be working to get them access to this program regardless. So about 60% of our population is eligible for E&T in Colorado. And all 4 main parts of our program are eligible for reimbursement. So our classroom training, our transitional job, our job development, job coaching, and our retention services are all reimbursable expenses. And that basically includes all of our program-facing staff, except for wages right now as our major expense. And as Nick and Susan said, hopefully that'll come online soon. And then I know you all might be thinking, CEO is a big national organization. We have 30 sites. We have a lot of national capacity to support this program. If you're sort of thinking through, gosh, like it's a lot to keep track of, who's on SNAP, get them enrolled in E&T, tracking federal funding, preparing for an audit. Yes, we're a national organization, but every site individually is responsible for their performance for E&T. So they essentially run this program, and it's like we have 30 different E&T programs. So if you're a small ESE, I really encourage you to really kind of think about how you all can handle this, because we can handle it in each of our sites. Yeah, and you'll hear more about each of these components in CEO and our program and our webinar series down the line. And in particular, you'll hear from our Colorado staff talk about their experience serving participants with this program.
Great, thanks, Casey. Just some next steps before we open up. There's a lot of great questions in the chat as well that I want to highlight. So next steps. So I want to remind everybody that we have a website already created with tools and resources, and I'll jump over there in a minute. So every 2 weeks, we're gonna same place, same channel. Not that actually the same channel, it'd be a different Zoom link, but you get the idea. So every 2 weeks at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we'll be hosting a different webinar component. Next week is offering services for E&T. Here's some of the agenda for what we'll be highlighting. And we'll have different guests and presenters throughout the webinar series, to especially practitioners of this, which I think is really valuable for everybody here. Like sometimes it makes it really concrete when you hear people who are doing the work and how they do it. So we'll keep trying to highlight that through the webinar series. We'll also send out a quick survey after this to see, how did we do? If there's, and start really gathering information from you all about, what do you need to know? Like, where do you want to really dig in? And hopefully all the webinars do that. But again, it's a learning process, and we want to make sure we're tailoring the webinars to what you need. And last but not least, feel free to email me if you got random questions. I'll probably just end up forwarding them to Nick and Casey and Susan. But but regardless, feel free to send them to me. Let me know what questions you have. And then really quickly, let me just jump off this screen and share with you all our workshop page. Nick, or can you guys see the workshop page?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is our Reddit workshop page. And so obviously we have the events here. Then I wanted to highlight for you all the tools and resources, which is what we've been, some of the questions in the chat were about, were, you know, what's, so we have our, you're going to see this, you'll probably be so sick of seeing this Venn diagram throughout the time, but it's here. This is how we have the information laid out based on the 4 components. And then we also will post the webinar PowerPoint along with the recording after every week. And then this will slowly keep filling up throughout every week, where we'll keep adding content and resources after every webinar. So just wanted to highlight that for you. This is going to be kind of your one-stop shop for all of the SNAP information. And also check out our cool video and send that around to the registration is going to be open throughout the process. So if you know of somebody that you think, oh man, this is would really be great for this organization. While we're really highlighting employment social enterprises in this, if there's other CBOs or other partners or stakeholders that you think this would be really valuable for, you can point them to the website. They can still register for any of the webinars, so throughout the entire series. So just wanted to highlight that for you all. So let me stop the share and let me go to our questions. I know we had a lot of them. Some of them were answered along the way. So I think we stopped with Phyllis, who asked a question, can a state-funded adult education program participate? I don't know if that makes sense to.
So this is Nick, I can take that. And yes, it can. I mean, I think you may have seen when Susan went through the components that vocational training and education are components. And so again, if all the other things are sort of in place, that's something that the state SNAP agency is interested in contracting for, and having a provider that does that, that's certainly an option.
Do eligible expenses vary by state, or is there an easy to access list of these?
So I'll start on that one. So what we're giving you are some sort of general guidelines, and these I think for the most part reflect FNS's policy. States can start with those policies and can adjust them a little bit. But by and large, what we have shared today is what you should see in general in your state or in your county if you're working with a county SNAP agency. I will say with supportive services, you may see some variation there, and some states will be a little more, they'll have some tighter parameters around what they consider as acceptable supportive services. But the general idea on supportive services is that if they're reasonable and they're necessary and they're directly connected to a person's employment and training plan and participation, then they should be eligible.
Thanks, Nick. So it looks like Jason, our friend from USDA, is answering some of our questions for us. Thank you, Jason. And I don't know, Nick, if you or Susan or Casey, if you wanted to add on this, but I know one of the questions was, our participants are paid and we have seen some lose their SNAP benefits due to their pay. How do we know what that threshold is? And Jason answered that the SNAP agencies publish the gross income limit by household. If there's any other doubts or questions, to contact their SNAP agency. I don't know if you have anything to add on to that. It's a pretty thorough answer.
Yeah. I can just add quickly that, CEO participants have that challenge. We pay daily in our transitional jobs. And as Nick mentioned, the participation for E&T, you have to be on SNAP the month that you participate in a component. So it is the case sometimes that individuals will earn enough in their transitional job with us that they do lose SNAP. So we try to just stay in communication with participants about that possibility, just generally, E&T or not. I think that basically the nice thing about E&T is for a lot of us, our participants truly are in this point of transition in their lives. So no matter what, we try to get them connected with both SNAP and SNAP E&T, and they can be on it that month and get those services and get those support services. And if they do eventually earn too much, then okay, but they have that resource while they are on SNAP.
Thanks, Casey. If a community college that is an approved third-party partner waives the tuition and fees for SNAP participants, could the cost waived by the college be eligible for the 50% reimbursement from SNAP E&T?
You want to take that, Susan?
Sure. I think the quickest answer is no. So colleges there's a lot of conversation about this, and it's a good question because it comes up a lot. But a provider can't ask for reimbursement for a service that isn't sort of the same cost that's applied to another non-SNAP E&T participant. So if they don't have an actual, if they're waiving the cost of tuition and it's in the form of a scholarship or a grant or something where there is sort of an actual expense applied and it's non-federally funded, then yeah, there's the opportunity to draw down reimbursement. But if they're just kind of opening it up because and sort of making that room and applying kind of an expense then on top of that, that's not okay. And that's kind of as far as I'm going to take that. It's a highly technical question and a good one. And I think we could probably answer it a little bit more articulately, being able to refer back to some policy and point you to some policy. But that's sort of the gist of it.
A question from a fellow REDF staff that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. How frequently are reimbursements processed? Are they timely?
I'll go ahead. That is a really, it varies from state to state and community to community. So, Nick showed that slide, the arrow of how the money flows down. That's sort of how it works. The timing then is really dependent on each program. I think, every state SNAP agency wants that to happen as quickly as possible. But there are a lot of factors that play into that. It could be the frequency of how a provider is, how often a provider is invoicing, the volume of invoices that are coming into the SNAP agency, at any given time. I think that the ideal and the typical cycle when you're working with a program that's kind of running and doing its thing would be sort of a monthly, for previous months. And I think typically what I've is a lot of community colleges might have a different cycle because they operate on a semester or a quarter cycle and expenses incur kind of on that. So that is often how their billing cycle. But, I think once things are kind of up and running, but sometimes there are things that there's some back and forth that needs to happen because we're dealing with federal funds and the accountability that comes with that from both the provider and the state SNAP agency. There's a lot of oversight and review that happens. So there's just different places where that can get held up, but usually it's sort of on a monthly cycle.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Let's see. Some of these were answered in the chat. CDBG funds count, yes. Are there any barriers to folks with criminal records? Casey answered that. Anything you want to elaborate on there, Casey, about, most of the people that are being served have barriers to employment. But I think, Casey, you highlighted that there might be some restrictions regarding drug conviction. So you want to maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I mean, it's very few at this point. As I'm sure you guys know, there's a, federal opt-out law that states have to opt out of a lifetime ban for SNAP for those with drug convictions, and almost all states have. There's some partial bans on the books. So sometimes if you have a certain drug conviction or 2 or more convictions, you still can't access SNAP, but thankfully more and more states are opting out of those. And in fact, just this year, CEO worked with a bunch of organizations in Michigan to get the state to remove their drug conviction SNAP ban from the books. So that should be the only thing, and it's becoming less of a factor.
Great. We have about 6 minutes left. I think we could probably get through the rest of these. So are follow-up services offered or mandated for 50/50 programs? In other words, is case management provided up to at least 90 days after a participant has received a sufficient job placement or obtained a credential?
So I can start on that. It's not necessarily mandated, I wouldn't say, but it is an opportunity. So if a third-party partner is doing job retention as one of their components, that's what they've been approved to do. Then as people, get to that phase, they can move them into job retention. I think that some of the updated regs basically spell out that job retention has to be for at least 30 days, and it can go to 90 days. That what happens during job retention can be a combination of things. It can be sort of this case management, sort of employment-focused case management. It can be the offering of participant reimbursements. But, it's not, for the most part, it's not a mandated type of thing. It's pretty much client-based.
Thanks. Are you able to provide examples of how emergency housing is used as a participant reimbursement? How much, how often, how long?
That one, if
Sure.
I'm not sure, and some of our FNS folks or somebody else can chime in about there being a specific time limit, but I think I don't think you can do it for longer than is it 3 months, Nick? And
yeah, I mean, there's
FNS
variation
folks?
from state to state.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's meant to be, very short term, and like Sue said, tied to an emergency, or maybe helping somebody as they become employed, moving into stable housing, something to that. It's not meant to replace like a Section 8 voucher or rapid rehousing, or the types of services that a housing system would be offering.
Yeah, this is Jason with USDA. I can give a short comment on it. We're actually reviewing this, and the intent was originally to actually connect it to more to job retention rather than current services. So if you are going to be considering giving emergency housing and you're not under a current contract already doing it, then the state's going to have to probably consult with us and USDA to figure out if it's allowable and appropriate. So.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
So I know we got 3 minutes left. Hopefully, let's see if we can get through a couple more. Yes, Carl, slide decks on workshop. Something a little bit more about self-employed. Can you share more about self-employed, Susan?
Yeah, I think that is so an activity that would include somebody starting their own business and developing their own business. I know there are programs out there that focus on that for individuals, especially I think in the gig economy, that's more and more seen as an opportunity. And so I think that component is to capture training and support that's focused on that.
Awesome, thank you.
Greg, can I make one quick comment here? I think having Jason jump in on that one question is a good reminder that, you know, we can provide good technical assistance and information on SNAP E&T, but ultimately it's a reminder that your state SNAP agency and FNS are the entities that really can offer sort of the final word on a lot of these policy questions. And again, that's why it's so important to work with your state, work with FNS on all of this.
Yeah, great point, Nick. And I think part of this process is also introducing you to that of how you get to know your state, how do you interact with your state, your local SNAP agency, so it might be county administered too, or FNS. And I think some of that's just part of the learning process as well. So I know we're at 1 minute, so I wanted to be kind of mindful of people's time. We're happy to stay on. Nick and Susan, Casey, can you guys stay on and answer these follow-up questions? Okay, so just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's participated, and we appreciate your participation, and we'll see you at the next webinar. And we'll kind of jump through these next questions just to make sure we answer everybody's. So if you're able to and you want to listen to these answers, feel free to stay on past the 12:30 mark. So do you know what when a next round of funding is going out? I know it's New York NYS OTDA, I'm not familiar with that acronym, administers funds for E&T, but can't find info on that. I don't know if that we need more clarification on that. Nick or Susan, do you know what that acronym means? Or Casey?
Yeah, I think you should try that one.
I can help. Yeah, I can help with that. So OTDA is my understanding. Maybe New Yorkers can correct me. But so yeah, CEO, we have offices in New York and in the city and upstate as well. And actually, New York, it runs their E&T program a little bit differently than a lot of states. They issue an RFP, which isn't that unusual, but they have more of a performance-based structure that most states don't have. So their RFP will contain all of that information, and our understanding is it's going to come out sometime this spring. And I think it's every 4 years they do theirs, or 5 years. It's longer. So yeah, happy to talk about New York more as we get into the cohorts, especially.
Okay, great, thanks. Valencia, I think you're still on. The question was, is tuition charged by CBO for training eligible for 100% funding?
%100% funding can cover tuition. However, 100% funding isn't as a CBO third-party partner, 100%, it's not likely that you're going to have 100% funds to cover that. So it could be, and it's always a possibility, that states are offering leftover 100% funds as, maybe seed funding to get a program off the ground, but it's not consistent and reliable. So the real opportunity is in that 50-50 bucket, which requires that you have your non-federal funds up front that cover those costs, and then you can get reimbursed after the fact. So I hope that answers your question, but not to completely exclude the concept of 100% funds, but they're not really the sustainable, ongoing source that would keep your program going.
Thanks, Susan. And I think this is the last one from Dana for you, Casey, about the 60% of CEO participants. Is there a template or model to determine what % of your participants would need to be eligible for E&T to make this a viable financial opportunity?
Yeah, and I apologize, I probably rambled too quickly through that point. So the thing that it's good for ESEs to keep in mind, since we serve both SNAP and non-SNAP individuals, is that these funds have to be spent on SNAP participants. So we'll get into it more when we do the budget webinar and sort of thinking about how to allocate your expenses, but you have to allocate somehow to account for the fact that not all of your census will be on will be on SNAP. So the way we do it at CEO, especially since almost all of our program is an eligible E&T expense, is we allocate when we invoice by what percentage of our census was enrolled in E&T that month of our eligible expenses. So I can explain that a lot more, but just to explain the 60% a little bit more. So basically what that means is when we invoice, 60% of our eligible expenses each month in Colorado are reimbursed because 60% of our participants were in E&T. But to answer your question, Dina, I would say no. Like he really can scale your E&T program to anticipate whatever administrative burden that you think you might have. So if you think that this is going to be a little bit on your staff to figure out, and you don't have the funds to hire E&T staff, basically you can start with a portion of your program and make that your E&T program, and kind of scale it small to start with and really figure it out. And then you can add more of your program as you go along over the years. And that's certainly what we've done at CEO in the past. We didn't always offer retention, for example, but now that's a part of all of our E&T programs. So again, I would just encourage you, if you're thinking like any of this is administratively difficult or hard, don't let that be a barrier to exploring an E&T partnership. We're definitely here to help you work through that.
Great. Yeah,
I would second that. I don't think there's a hard like formula that you want to apply because everybody's different. So.
And we'll do a little bit, I think we'll highlight this later on in another session, but some of the tools that you can use to assess, you know, where this fits and if this is the right opportunity. It's not, there's so many factors that go into consideration here that it's not like you have to be XYZ to meet this. So, but we'll help kind of walk you through that. And there will be a session on building administrative capacity for E&T. I think that's session 5 that we'll be able to present to you, and we'll walk you through the different tools and resources available to help you assess that. So I think we managed to get through all the questions, which is great. And we were only 6 minutes over, which is also not bad. So with that, I'll just say thank you again for your time. Again, the resources are going to be posted on SNAP, on the Reddit Workshop SNAP E&T page. You have my email, and bring your questions to the next session as you're starting to dive into this. Bring your questions, bring your examples, and we'll start to really dive into this throughout the session. So thank you all for your time. Have a great rest of your week. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Glad you could join us.